So I managed to get my girlfriend into D&D last summer after playing a few games with friends. To play more, we checked out 2 different game stores. Both times, random men would make her super uncomfortable. The first time it happened, she was just checking out the store with me before I sat down to play. She had a time constraint, so I was saying goodbye when one of the men spoke up and said to her, "I bet you don't even want to play, and you're just going to do girl stuff." The rest of the table laughed, and it was totally uncalled for since she did want to play. We both ended up leaving shortly after. The next time, we were in a completely different game shop, waiting to play, just sitting at the table. A really quiet guy had been listening to her when I was deciding what snacks to buy, and the guy says, "Well, wouldn't you rather have an I immediately say, "Take it easy, dude. You are way over the line." Needless to say, I ended up becoming a DM myself, so things worked out in the end, but please, show respect to your fellow gamers at the game store. A great message. There are some people out there who just take anything someone says to their romantic partner as internal lingo for touching dinkleberries, which, no, that's not how people talk. Some people have this thing called conversation. You should try it sometime. You might learn a thing or two. Cast: the Dungeon Master, Alex, the first horny player, Barry, the second horny player, Cleo, IRL friend of Barry, and Dan has no bearing on the story. He's just there. And there's also myself. Part 1, getting to know you. We met in a Facebook group and migrated to a Discord. Everyone seemed to have a pretty good vibe in and out of game. Someone specifically requested to be the Dungeon Master. They'd like to play in some one-shots, but they had a homebrew idea. So last summer, we started with a one-shot to lead into the homebrew, and it went well. We did a session 0 before the campaign and went over, the hard passes, an RPG checklist. One player, Alex, was a hard no for any in-character romance with their characters. Okay, that's fine. We were all in agreement on a fade to black policy if anyone was down to clown. Stop that. A few sessions in, we added a new player, Barry. We went over the checklist again, and nothing had changed. Things were great. All of our characters were vibing. One of our original players, Cleo, asked Barry out on an in-game date. They were in real-life friends, so they thought it would be fun. The fake date went on for way too many IRL hours. Cleo and the DM kept trying to wrap it up, but Barry kept bringing up Alex and how Cleo and the rest of us were treating Alex. Specifically, how we didn't ask him about his life story and why none of us were interested in a romantic relationship with him. Well, we were in the middle of an in-game coup. Personally, romancing someone isn't high on my list in the middle of a bloody revolution. Myself and player Dan had gone to bed. We thought Alex went to sleep too. Apparently, Alex stayed up all night until Barry and Cleo's characters returned. We didn't find out until the next session. Part 2, fade to black. The next session, it was a session. We all ended up getting separated. Alex and Barry, of course, managed to get together in the end. Literally, they got somewhere safe and decided that was the time and place to get it on. With details. The Dungeon Master immediately faded to black once hands started wandering, but they kept trying to describe things. The DM ended up muting them after progression was just not gonna happen. This did not sit well with Alex and Barry. We wouldn't find this out until the final and subsequent session. The final session. Spoilers, it wasn't really a session. Alex and Barry hopped into voice and accused us of bullying Alex, specifically leaving Alex out of any flirting scenes. The Dungeon Master came prepared and went over the checklist. Response: Alex did not want anyone to flirt with their characters, and we all agreed on fade to black. Well, nobody ever asked Alex about their backstory, but we did. We tried, at least. Alex and I were from the same place. We had talked about being childhood friends, but Alex wasn't interested. Cleo and Dan had many one-on-one chats in character with Alex about their family. Alex never volunteered any information. Alex and Barry kept going in circles. Not for much longer, though. The Dungeon Master kicked them. The remainder of us sat there for a minute in confused silence. The Dungeon Master said there wasn't going to be a game that night. That was a good call, Dungeon Master. There probably shouldn't be a game that night. This whole situation is extremely awkward, but it shows the flaw with the Session Zero. Look, I think Session Zeros are great, and you should be doing them. You should always do a Session Zero, especially for longer campaigns, but like all things, there's a failure point. Sometimes people simply don't listen. And frankly, when people don't listen, that's a breach of the good old-fashioned social contract, and that is literally one of the biggest red flags you could have. Everyone comes together, they have an agreement that this is the content that we are okay with. And then somebody looks at that agreement, crumples it up, and throws it away. Actively choosing to neglect what other people are comfortable with and not comfortable with. In any social situation, D&D or no, that is not acceptable, and in my mind, should result in a very swift kick. Also, and this should go without saying, for the love of God, please stop describing the hanky-pankies in Safe for Work games. Seriously, what the fuck? The main story happened today, but please allow me to illustrate the dynamic of my table. I've been playing D&D 5th edition with this group about 4 years now, and have often considered leaving. During the pandemic, for a time, I was playing long distance while the other players were gathering in person. Many of the problems stem from trying to call into play. You know, stuff like being talked over. Once I was in person with them again, the stress level decreased significantly, and so I stayed. At the table, there were usually 5 of us, but sometimes there was as many as 7 of us. Myself, the rogue, the monk, and the DM are the more experienced people. The other 4 are new to the game. I emphasize this because even though we've been playing for 4 years, players 6 and 7 joined the core group about 2 years ago and played kind of infrequently. Additionally, the other 2, Cleric and Barbarian, are the types of people who refuse to learn their spells and abilities. For Barbarian, I don't believe this is intentional. She's a very passive player who prefers to sit and just quietly watch sessions roll on by. But she does remember to rage and joins in on our jokes. Cleric participates in conversation, but I've heard them say aloud they intentionally don't bother to learn their character sheets, but then they complained about feeling like there's nothing they can do during encounters. You might guess that Cleric is the one most of my past and present upsets are about, and you would be correct in that guessing. Cleric is very prone to making choices and using spells that do not make sense for the context of whatever is happening in the game. We swap campaigns relatively frequently, and the characters they made in the past were usually joke characters, ones with uncomfortable names and themes, or characters who had zero buy-in. For those who aren't familiar, this is when a character has no reason or desire to stick with the party, go adventuring, or follow the plot. For example, in our first game as a group, we were ambushed in a cave. Cleric completely ignored the attackers to search for food. The DM tried to discourage this and said there was no food. Instead, then, Cleric insisted on looking for a bat in the cave to kill and cook. The DM asked them to roll perception, and they rolled well. DM ruled that they identified a bat in the darkness, but it was high up near the cavern ceiling, way out of reach. Cleric wasted several turns trying to attack, cook, and eat the bat, despite combat happening around them. I discussed the searching for bat situation and other similar behaviors with the DM in the past, and it seemed that that is part of why we swapped campaigns so often. The goal is to allow Cleric and Barbarian opportunities to try various classes and playstyles while encouraging growth in roleplay. The hope has been, by learning the game, they'll grow out of that behavior. Well, Tavern people, Cleric has not. Since we swapped to this campaign and I became the rogue and Cleric became the cleric, they have actually been doing a lot more character roleplay. It's as if they found the right character for them. Everyone at the table said that this is their favorite group of player characters so far. I've been really happy to see Cleric more invested in their personal player character and having a reason to buy in this time around. I was hopeful for the past few months that DM's plan had worked. Maybe they truly grew out of these new player bad habits, but old habits reared their head today, and when we went into battle. We had just come off a multi-day long rest in-game, and our characters have a lot of provisions, such as rope, potions, rations. We were at full health and spells. We descended upon a group of giant spiders and driders who had been following us. My rogue got a great roll in her initiative and zoomed in first to take out some of the lackeys. We even had the element of surprise. Now, something about Cleric I have noticed is that they are very hesitant to use their spell slots. So in-game, when my rogue found a Rod of Absorption amongst the scattered treasure, she gave it to the Cleric as a gift. My rogue expressed how difficult it was for her to part with such a valuable item, but she knew it would be in the good hands of the Cleric. I explained to Cleric's player that the Rod absorbs spells, and then the energy from those spells can be used to create spell slots. The Rod had already been charged a little, which means extra spell slots mid-combat. DM wrote an item card for Cleric to remember this. It remained in Cleric's inventory for about 3 sessions and was never used. A session or 2 ago, they gave it up to the Warlock and bought themselves a wand of Wall of Fire. Today, when descending upon the group of Driders, the first thing the Cleric wanted to do was use their wand of Wall of Fire. Not using any spell slots, by the way. However, they could not clarify how they intended to use the wall. By the time their turn in combat came around, they changed their mind. Then my rogue became paralyzed. An area of silence was also cast, initially covering Cleric, Monk, and myself. Against the paralysis, the DM required rogue to make a wisdom save rather than a constitution save, a la like a willpower thing. My character's wisdom is so low, it's become a running gag at the table. I failed hard and kept failing for 4 rounds long after the silence was dispelled by the Warlock, who was never even in the silenced area. Around my 3rd failure, I broke character to ask if someone would help my rogue. She was stuck there, unable to move, attack, or even speak, and had her health being slowly chipped away by a Drider. Someone asked about a spell like Greater Restoration. The Cleric looked at their sheet and said, oh, they had it. But they didn't want to use the spell slot. So she attacked with a cantrip the next turn, did some movement, and left me paralyzed and injured. I hate it when other players do this, and it's sadly common at this table, but I fully admit that by this point I found myself on my phone, answering texts from other friends as I waited for the rounds to pass. I listened in on what was happening and commented when necessary, when suddenly the Cleric decided to call me out. Because they saw me smile at my phone, they asked what they were missing that was in my phone, like a teacher telling you to share with the class. This paused what was happening at the table. I felt so embarrassed. I brushed it off and said I was getting texts and my friends are funny, but honestly, I was kind of mad. Cleric had the ability and opportunity to cure my player's paralysis or get her out of danger and chose not to. Combat in D&D is long, especially with 5 players who don't know their abilities, and 6 monsters in the turn order. Waiting for 5 rounds without being able to do anything is really boring. Not to mention, the other players were focusing on their turns and were not discussing me or addressing my rogue. So all I could do was, well, wait. Based on my text message timeline, the paralysis lasted at least an hour and a half in real time. Finally, the monk decided to take action. He asked if he would have noticed something was wrong with the rogue, whose body was now shrouded in magical darkness. DM said that yes, Monk would have been able to see that after the first attack, Rogue did not move or attack back for several rounds before the darkness went up, and that is unusual. Monk went to the edge of the darkness. I'm sorry. Were they trying to pretend like their characters wouldn't understand what the paralysis is? Hey, ever since Rogue just got absolutely by those ghasts, he hasn't been moving. Should we worry about that? Well, I mean... Nah. Yeah, nah. Anyway, Monk went to the edge of the darkness and felt around, before then pulling my character out. Still paralyzed, he carried her to the Cleric. With no excuse left not to help, Cleric cured Rogue of the paralysis. Monk used his Healing Hands ability to give me a boost, and I waited for my turn to come around again. Sometime after this, Cleric was deciding what to do on their turn. They made Spiritual Weapon on the battlefield, but the enemy was nearly 100 feet away from them, and the weapon could only move 20 feet per turn. Monk suggested that Cleric could dismiss and recast the Spiritual Weapon to get it closer. Cleric declined, saying it would be a waste of what is implied to be spell slots. I chimed in, reminding them that they get slots back after every long rest, and combat was nearly over. So depending on how many slots they had left, it may be worthwhile to do that. Cleric's reply was that they have most of their spell slots because they have been using cantrips this whole time, and they decided to just move it 20 feet. To my recollection, The spiritual weapon was not used ever again. Overall, it feels like Cleric is only happy in an encounter if they deal damage each round, which regularly keeps them from using their support spells for teammates, which is weird, because they didn't enjoy non-support fighting classes such as Rogue or Barbarian with previous characters. Maybe killing the Drider is how they tried to help my Rogue, but having Rogue back in the fight would have helped speed up the rate of combat by far. Cleric just doesn't seem to value what non-damaging abilities bring to the table, even when we praise them for saving our bacon. Even after 4 years of playing, they still try to use spells like Healing Word, followed by another leveled spell such as Dawn, because Healing Word is a bonus action, no matter how often the DM tells them that the only way to cast 2 spells in a turn is with a cantrip. The lack of awareness and teamwork is really what gets me here. We usually do not have more than 1 combat per session due to how long each encounter takes, and everyone is always eager to take a long rest, to go shopping afterwards. Spell slots are a renewable resource. Your spells are there to help you and your party members. If you won't use them when one of your primary damage dealers is down for the count, then when will you use them? This is the first instance of this in 6 months, so I can keep on going, but it is a harsh reminder of why I probably shouldn't join the next campaign. This being one situation in 6 months, it's not the worst thing ever, but I can certainly see being extremely mad about this. This is what we call in the business selfish play. The good news is it's not so habitual that the entire party is doing it constantly. This is a 1 in every 6 months occurrence and usually doesn't happen, but still when it does happen, I mean, yeah, it tugs at the heartstrings. It kind of makes you upset because if you want to play the game, you want to play the game, and your party not helping you out and playing selfishly, that sucks. D&D is cooperative, and usually the most optimal thing to do is to be selfless, to encourage teamwork, to work together, and to support fellow players. Also, yeah, I get it, phones at the table can be annoying, but frankly, if somebody is paralyzed for a literal hour, I'm probably not gonna blame them for wanting to do literally anything else. So, I was playing an evil half-elf cleric of a war god. I played him as an army vet. I was just back home from serving my first hitch in the army. He had a limp from a bad knee injury, and it's not exactly that he had evil intentions. He just didn't have any mercy nor patience, especially if the lives of the party were on the line. Case in point, we had come to an inn to discuss business. Mage needed guards for him and his caravan the next day. We agreed, and I even haggled the price, since no one else wanted to do it. So after he and half the party left to go get supplies, I and the other 2 sat and drank a few celebratory beers. These 3 guys come in, looking like they might be Thieves Guild. They point to the 3 of us and said, "We don't like you, we don't like you, and we especially don't like you," pointing to me at that last part. So I cast Hold Person, which at our level caught all 3, and then I went and pulled a dagger off their belt and slit all 3 of their throats. What are you doing? Don't worry, I'm preemptively defending myself. Evil? Yeah, maybe. I mean, I certainly wasn't being nice, but in my eyes, it was self-defense. I didn't know their intentions, nor what they were going to bring to this bar fight. Unfortunately, neither did they. Anyway, next day we're on the trail, guarding this caravan, and I'm riding in a wagon 3 back from the front because no one else wanted to ride with me. I don't know why, but the caravan stopped, so I get out and hobble my way to the front to see why we stopped. There was a dead Kingsguard in the middle of the road, so I go up to him, telling everyone else to get back in their wagons and prepare to move out. They expect me to heal the guy as he breathes out his last, "Giants, we were attacked." He didn't get to finish that last part because I cast Cause Wounds and threw his body off the road, yelling, "Go, it's the log in the road trick!" And then we start getting hit by boulders being thrown by giants. We fought, killing the 2 giants. I heal some people. I hurt a giant. I get knocked unconscious. As I'm being revived after the combat, the paladin comes up and stabs me while I'm at 1 hit point. Says he sensed evil in me. Like, when? I was gonna make an assassin character just to kill his paladin, but I didn't have to. He was left as the only character who had healing, and in the next combat, he was killed before he could even lay on hands himself. I'm just mad because I missed out on the fun bit of role-playing. I missed playing someone who just had no craps to give and the ability to do something about it. You guys probably are aware of how the community responded to this post, but I think this guy's response to the community's response just makes it all the more obvious, you know? Okay, well, I didn't expect this to blow up. First off, let's all take a breath here. Understand, the character's not the player. I am not a psycho. I was playing a person with questionable morals when it comes to taking life in his and the party's defense. Because A, he has been in combat and had seen a lot of allies die, and he had suffered a life-changing injury himself. And B, knowing how tenuous everyone's grasp is on life, he was determined to keep himself and his comrades alive, even if he has to do some pretty nasty things to do it. I personally, and the DM, grew up in rough neighborhoods where fighting was common. So when he described the way the men confronted our characters at the inn, it was clear this wasn't just some men who wanted us to leave. They were positioning to surround us. They had weapons. Just because they weren't drawn doesn't mean they weren't a threat. And before and after the encounter, the DM made it clear to the others that they were meant to kill us. It was the cold-blooded way I slit their throats after disabling them that makes it evil. But hey, that's my character. As for the guy on the road, I didn't technically kill him. Remember the limp? There were, if I remember, 3 other characters who had heard the guy's dying breaths around the giants. The DM even told me. Beyond help from my healing spells, I just took the initiative to remove the obstacle to us going forward. Trust me, if I had been in the lead, I would have whipped the horses faster past the dying guy because I recognized the situation for what it was. Again, not nice, but I was role-playing him as someone willing to do not nice things to keep the party alive. Obviously, as I only really got to play him for literally 2 hours of game time, I might seem like a murder hobo, but that's not the way I played him. He just got nothing out of these kills. Didn't even take the dagger he used to kill the thieves. Heck, I wasn't even worried about the XP. We weren't even looking for combat. We were enjoying our ale, and obviously, I was hoping to get everyone back in their wagons for this convoy so we could get out of the kill zone. Actually, that might have pissed off the DM if we had sped past this giant encounter. But anyway, essentially my character was a master of kicking people in the balls. It wasn't Marquise of Queensberry. I wasn't pretty. I wasn't nice. I didn't win respect or get the girls, but I stopped the fights. But you are right about making up an assassin to kill the paladin. That was pretty childish of me. It was a knee-jerk reaction, and like I said, I ended up not needing to anyway. So I'll take the hit on that one. I was just being honest about how I felt at the time. These situations aren't so much self-defense as they are murder. They're just out-and-out murder. And while, again, I don't like the situation of kill the character if you don't like what the player is doing, because that's an in-game solution to an out-of-game problem, at the same time, I really don't blame the paladin for taking this action. This dude was playing an outright murderous character, and if his justification is, it's what my character would do, well, guess what? That's probably what the paladin's character would do. The paladin is watching this person murder their way through every situation that we've seen described by this player, and the paladin reacted by going, okay, I don't like that. Stab. A bunch of people made fun of this guy, and the moral arguments he was trying to make were horrifying. My favorite being, my kills weren't evil because I didn't loot them, which is hilarious. This guy's trying to be Joel from The Last of Us. Hell, that entire scene with the paladin in the road is directly taken from The Last of Us Part 1. However, this guy clearly doesn't understand that a lot of things that make Joel such an awesome character are also what would make him really difficult to pull off in a D&D game. You could do it, sure, but it would take a lot of effort. And that's effort this guy clearly doesn't have the brains to pull off. I was DMing a game with a group, most of which were friends, and the others we were friendly with, but I didn't know them well, as they may have been friends of friends, that sort of thing. My friends and I like to inject a comedic aspect to a lot of our campaigns, as it loosens everyone up, and we share some laughs. At one point, the party is invited to an orc camp for some revelry after helping them. They either successfully defended the tribe or helped in a bountiful hunt, I can't remember which. There was one member of the party, the barbarian, who in real life was really shy, and I thought it would be funny to have one of the orc women come up to him, clap him on the back, and compliment his prowess in battle. This one is strong. He'll make a good husband. Come, we get married now. My idea was that he would then have to try and talk his way out of the situation without offending his host. I was kind of thinking of a situation like in Futurama with the Amazonian woman and Kif. The party seemed to enjoy this too, and laughs were had as the barbarian tried to politely turn down the offer, with the rogue coming in to rescue with a deception, convincing the orc woman that the barbarian wasn't really that tough or brave, and thus would make a poor husband for her. Oh yeah, he is terrified of spiders. Always has to get someone else to catch them for him. A day or two later, I received a message from the guy playing the barbarian though, and he was sounding quite upset, accusing me of trying to force him into an inappropriate encounter in what was meant to be a fun TTRPG. Now, I knew this guy was reserved and shy, which is why I anticipated he would try and get out of this marriage situation instead of going for it, which would be the source of the comedy. I also never intended it to get graphic. I always do the whole fade to black thing whenever romance is concerned, and that's only if the player takes the romance that far. I would never lead them into it. Secondly, I did use the language of marriage, not touching dingleberries. Although at the time, I thought he was overreacting a bit, I did apologize to him and tried to explain that it was just for comedic effect, and I didn't intend for it to get inappropriate. While he accepted my apology, things were still a bit awkward between us, as I don't think he believed my explanation, or he felt like he was the butt of the joke and that we were laughing at him, not at the situation. A couple years later, this player did come out as being asexual. I don't know if he was aware of this at the time of the game, or just in the closet, or if he was still figuring out his orientation. We were still teenagers when this game occurred, and while at the time I thought he was being overly sensitive, knowing this about him now, and that he was probably going through some stuff at the time, I wouldn't say his message to me was an overreaction, so now that's not really what I would imply with the story. So my question is, was I in the wrong here? I'm not gonna do the whole song and dance. I don't think anyone is the bad guy here. I just think it's a bunch of teenagers having communication issues. It happens, especially when you're young. I mean, when I was a teenager, I still hadn't really figured out that I was asexual, but I still reacted to things in the same way that I would now. I still tried to keep all of that material around relationships away from myself because while it didn't make me overtly uncomfortable, it wasn't something that I enjoyed. But at the same time, I'm not going to hold my friends to account. They didn't know, and frankly, neither did I at the time. Though, of course, just because it's not malicious doesn't mean that it's good or ideal. When you are playing D&D, the best thing you could do is have a session 0. Go over the kind of topics that you're going to go over in the game, and more importantly, ask them what kind of topics they would rather avoid. And hopefully this player will tell you the truth and say, hey, I'm not okay with the hanky-panky stuff in the game. Alright, I am working on this one. Very last minute. But in any case, if you guys enjoyed, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out our Tavern adjacent podcast where we talk about all things TTRPGs while also talking about some of my homebrew. We've got some fun stuff going into my 3rd D&D campaign, so if you're interested, head into the cards, and while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down in the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment another alpha male to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Hey, by the way, in the description, there is our email where you can send us your horror stories for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. But even if you don't have any stories and that's like, comment, subscribe, I will see you all next time. Farewell.